As anybody who's a frequent watcher of my channel will long already know, Megamind, and specifically its true villain Titan, are among my favorite subjects to talk about, as I've dedicated countless videos and shorts to him. But one complaint I've gotten quite often is on the spelling of Titan's name, as I always spell it Tighten, or the way Hal spells it when he writes out Titanville, while others insist that it's supposed to be spelled the way Megamind intended it to be, Titan. Now, I'm not here to argue which way is actually the correct way to spell it, especially because the subtitles refer to him by both spellings at different times. Instead, what I'd like to point out here is that those who argue over the way the character's name should be spelled are overlooking an important aspect to Megamind's moral, which is destiny versus free will. And the spelling of that name ties a lot more into that than most would think. And today, I'd like to explain exactly how and why that is. And as I'm basically required to say in every Megamind video at this point, there will be spoilers for this movie ahead. So in case you don't want to know anything else, you shouldn't proceed with this video. Okay. So to start off simply, the main message behind Megamind is a pretty simple one, which is spoken almost verbatim by the titular character at the end of the movie, that we all have free will and the ability to make our own choices, and aren't bound by destiny to be who we must. In other words, Megamind is saying that it's our ability to make our own choices and not fate that determines who we are. And this is shown all throughout the movie with quite a few different characters as a matter of fact. But the most obvious of these would of course be Megamind himself. Though a nice guy at heart who initially wanted to do good, he's led to believe that it's his destiny to become a villain, since that's pretty much the only thing society will let him be, and thus becomes one in only the most superficial ways possible in order to feel he has a purpose and that he's accomplishing something. And because he feels that it's his fate to be a bad guy and something he can never change, he doesn't even attempt to show people he's not actually evil until he's essentially forced to by Hal. And the whole experience causes him to finally realize that he did have a choice all along. And all of that is also reflected just as well with Metro Man. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself here. The point is, a running theme throughout Megamind is people believing they're destined to be one thing, but circumstances beyond their control make them realize that they have the free will to make their own choices and that their future isn't written out for them. Instead, they're in control of the pen and paper to write it out for themselves, so to speak. And this is where the whole spelling behind Titan's name thing comes into the picture. Since Megamind believes for most of the movie that destiny and fate control everything, he not only thinks that Hal getting infused with Metro Man's powers was meant to happen, but that it means he will automatically make for the perfect hero. That Hal was destined to become the hero that would replace Metro Man. So with this mistaken belief, he completely manufactures a backstory so that Hal will believe it was fate for him to become a hero as well, and thus make for an even better opponent to be bested by. And when it seems that Hal has succeeded in this task, Megamind bestows upon him the name Titan. Only because things don't actually work this way, it turns out that Hal was not only a horrible choice for the role of a superhero, but also chooses to go down his own path when he no longer sees any benefit to the whole thing. And as a result, he decides to become a supervillain instead. And since he's a complete idiot, mistakenly believes his name is spelled Titan, and accidentally crowns himself as such. So the point here is, when it seems that Hal is on track to becoming a superhero, and therefore following his destiny, his name is spelled Titan, as it's, quote, supposed to be. But when he chooses to go against all of that and become a supervillain instead, he spells his name as Titan, which is inaccurate, but the way he chooses to spell it. In other words, the fact that his, quote, superhero name is spelled two different ways throughout the movie, as well as when he's referred to by those different spellings, is the perfect representation of the movie's theme of fate versus free will. Because when it's spelled Titan, he's being what he believes destiny has chosen for him. And when it's spelled Titan, it reflects that he's used his free will to do what he wants to do with his superpowers instead. So the point here is, this debate over which way his name should be spelled is really irrelevant, because in order for one to understand the full picture of what Megamind is saying, they must accept that it's actually spelled both ways, and that each spelling represents both an integral part of the movie's theme and Hal's character. Because once again, the point of Megamind is that we don't have to follow what seems to be our predetermined fate, and that we all have the free will to make our own choices and be whoever we want to be. And once again, the change in spelling is a heavy reflection of Hal's progression in that regard. Because in the end, he misspells his name just how he misuses his powers, but in both cases it was still his choice to do so. Though, granted, the spelling came more out of stupidity than him genuinely choosing to spell it that way, but he still could have chosen to pick up a book and confirm how it was actually spelled, so it's still on him for it ultimately being spelled that way. Now, what's also interesting to note here, and something I already touched on, is that though the movie is saying that one doesn't have a predetermined fate, and that we all have the ability to choose what we want to be, it also doesn't ignore the fact that sometimes society imposes unfair standards on us that we don't want, and that it can be very difficult to break out of that molding. Just the opposite, in fact, as that ends up becoming a very important part of the story. Because when you really look at it, all three people who have any kind of superpowers are put into roles that they don't want, and have to fight and claw their way out of their designated roles to be who they really are. Because at first, Metro Man is the hero, Megamind is the villain, and Hal Stewart is just your average Joe. But in actuality, Metro Man wants to be the average Joe, Megamind wants to be the hero, and though Hal is at first okay with being normal and just rolling with the punches, he ultimately decides he wants to be a villain once he has the ability to do so and is susceptible to corruption. So the point here is, the standards that society had set upon these three individuals and who they actually want to be are very different and completely at odds with each other. And the result is that Metro Man has to fake his own death to become who he wants to be, and because Megamind believes he can never become who he'd like to, he decides to create a new hero, only for him to break free of his own molding and become a villain, forcing Megamind to become the hero he secretly wanted to in order to set things right. Really, most people don't give the writing behind Megamind enough credit here, because the inverted morality play at work here, as well as the subtle commentary on the seemingly inescapable pressures of society, are honestly very well done. But it also provides an optimistic message in noting that one doesn't have to beholden themselves to what society expects them to be, provided they aren't like Hal and want to do harm. As Metro Man himself says, he did have a choice, and though it was risky and a borderline irresponsible one, he did what he believed he had to do in order to break the cycle and ultimately make things better for everyone. And he didn't do that by following his designated destiny. He did that of his own free will instead, and everybody did prove to be better off in the long run by breaking that molding. So once again, that only goes to show just how deeply the message of fate versus choice is embedded into the story of Megamind. Okay, so the point here is, the different ways Hal's name is spelled as Titan should honestly be given more credit for how smartly it's all written. Because again, it not only makes for a pretty funny gag, but it also heavily ties into the theme of the movie as well. Because the correct spelling represents Hal's destiny, and the incorrect spelling represents Hal's free will, and that he has the ability to choose to do whatever he wants. And not to mention, it also makes for a great way to compare and contrast Hal's two alter egos, because when he's a superhero, he's Titan, and when he's a super villain, he's Titan, allowing the two to be separate without having to change pronunciation or Hal having to give himself an actual new name. So once again, when you really look at it, the fact that Titan is spelled two different ways throughout the movie in regards to Hal actually serves many purposes. So the debate on how it should be spelled is honestly pointless, because in the end, the right answer is that it's spelled both ways, and it all depends on when in the movie one is referring to Hal that determines which way is actually correct. Okay, I think I've made my point with all of this. So now I'd like to hear from all of you. Do you believe that the different ways Titan is spelled throughout Megamind is actually a lot more important than most give it credit for? Or do you believe it was simply a meaningless gag that people have taken way too seriously? Please feel free to let me know in the comments below. And just like always, you do not have to agree with any opinions expressed in this video if you don't want to. You are entitled to your own opinion, and if you think I've got this whole topic completely backwards, that is absolutely fine. And thank you all for watching. It is all much appreciated, and I hope to see you all next time.